You're at the dinner table, and the conversation has moved on without you. Not because anyone is being rude, not because you zoned out. You heard every word. You just didn't have anything to add. And for a second you noticed that, the absence of something to add. And then you looked around at the people you've known since you were 17 and felt something you don't have a clean word for. It's not boredom. You love these people. It's not superiority. You'd be embarrassed to call it that, and it wouldn't even be accurate. It's more like standing in a room where the furniture hasn't moved in years and realizing that you have, just slightly, just enough that the room feels a size smaller than you remember it. The conversation is about something that happened locally, a person, a situation, something that matters here, in this particular zip code, and not very much anywhere else. And you're nodding because you know how to nod. You're smiling because the moment calls for it. But underneath all of that, quiet and uncomfortable, is a feeling you haven't told anyone about, that you are no longer quite the same person who belongs here. There was a time when this group was everything. Not in the way people say that without meaning it, actually everything. The text chain that never stopped, the standing Friday ritual, the shorthand and the history, and the way you could walk into a room where these people were and feel immediately located, like your coordinates existed in relation to theirs, and as long as they were there, you knew where you were. You weren't performing anything around them. That's the specific thing you remember about it. You could be mid-sentence and forget what you were saying, and nobody thought less of you. You could be broke and frustrated and going nowhere obvious, and it didn't change anything. The friendship was not contingent on your progress. It just was. And you believed, not consciously, but in the structural way you believe things without deciding to, that this would always be the anchor, that whatever happened with the career, the money, the ambitions you kept slightly private even from yourself, these people would be the constant, the ground. You were working hard. That's the context. Something in you had caught fire, or maybe it had always been there and you'd finally stopped ignoring it. You started reading differently, thinking about different things, watching what other people were doing with their lives and comparing it, not out of envy, but out of calculation, out of a hunger that was newly specific. You wanted something, and you had started to believe you could get it. And you didn't think any of that would affect this, the friendships, the table, the Friday ritual. Why would it? These were two separate rooms. You could want something ambitious in one and come home to the familiar in the other. You thought you were big enough to hold both. And then you started getting what you wanted. Not dramatically, real change never is, but month by month the shape of your days shifted. You were doing more, moving faster, thinking in a register that was different from before. Opportunities appeared that required things from you, more time, more focus, a different quality of attention than the one you used to give to everything equally. You started saying no to things, just a few at first. The Friday thing became occasional, a group trip you had to skip because of something you couldn't explain easily without it sounding like you thought your work was more important than everyone else's, even though that wasn't it exactly. Or maybe it was a little bit, and that itself was new information about who you were becoming. Your reading list changed, and you didn't mention it. The podcasts you were listening to were ones you never would have found interesting 2 years ago. You were having conversations in other rooms, professional rooms, ambition rooms, that were starting to feel more natural than you expected. You were finding your register there. And then you'd come back to the table, to the text chain, to the familiar, and it was fine. It was good, even. You weren't looking for an exit, but there was a quality of translation required now, a gear shift. You'd put away the person you were becoming and find the person they'd always known, and it worked, mostly, but it cost something small each time. The conversation started to reveal a gap you hadn't named yet. Not in intelligence, not in value. You want to be precise here, because the wrong word would be dishonest. But in direction. They were oriented toward a life that was essentially stable, horizontal, content in a way you had quietly stopped being. And you were oriented toward something vertical, something hungry. And vertical and horizontal stop having as much to say to each other eventually. You were changing, and they were not. Or you were changing faster. Or you were changing in a direction that didn't overlap with theirs anymore. You stopped knowing how to explain what you were working on without it feeling like you were either showing off or performing humility to compensate for showing off. So you said less. You kept more private. You developed a version of yourself for that room that was friendly and warm and genuine, but also edited. And the editing felt like protection, theirs and yours both.
The moment it became undeniable was small. They always are. There was a weekend gathering, the kind that used to feel effortless, and you went because you wanted to go, because you missed the ease of it. And for a while it was okay, better than okay. There was laughter and history, and all the things that make long friendships feel like a specific kind of home. But at some point the night turned toward the future, what everyone was thinking about, what was coming, what was possible. And you listened to what people said they wanted, stability, familiarity, a version of the life they already had but slightly more comfortable, and you felt something tighten in your chest that you didn't want to feel. Not contempt, please understand that. You don't think their wants are smaller. Contentment is not a lesser goal, but the tightening was there, involuntary, some part of you recognizing that the distance you'd been trying to minimize in your head was actually real, and sitting in that room you could feel the width of it. You said something about what you were working on, briefly, carefully, and someone made a joke about how you always had something going on, some project, and everyone laughed, including you, and it was affectionate, it was. But underneath the laugh you felt something land that didn't feel like affection. It felt like being summarized, being filed away. You always had something going on. And on the drive home you kept replaying that sentence and feeling something you still don't fully have language for. Not hurt, not anger, something smaller and more honest than either. Like the specific sadness of being known by someone who knew the old version and had stopped updating their file. You weren't the same person they were laughing with in the memory behind that joke, and they didn't know that yet. Maybe you hadn't fully known it either until that drive home.
Here's the thing that nobody frames correctly when they talk about growth. They talk about it as addition. You gain skills, you gain perspective, you gain access, you gain options. What they don't say is that growth is also a form of departure. Every step you take in a direction takes you a step away from where you were. And where you were is where some of the people you love are still standing. This isn't a story about bad friends. It isn't a story about people who held you back or didn't believe in you. Those stories are simpler and more satisfying, and they're not what happened. What happened was quieter and harder to hold. You changed. They didn't change at the same pace, in the same direction. And the gap between you isn't anyone's fault. It's just the geography of two people walking different distances. You didn't outgrow them in the way that word usually implies, from above, looking down. It's more lateral than that. You grew in a direction that took you out of range, and you can still see them, and you can still love them, but the frequency you used to share no longer quite overlaps. You're not on the same channel anymore. and you can catch each other in brief windows, in good moments, in nostalgia, but there's a lag now that didn't used to exist. What you're grieving, and it is grief, even if no one has died, even if nothing dramatic has ended, is a specific kind of ease. The ease of being known without having to explain yourself. The ease of a room where your history did all the work of presence. You can't buy that back. You can't build it quickly with new people. That particular ease is a product of years, of a shared before, and you left the before. And what makes this hard to sit with is that you chose it. You chose the direction you walked. Nobody forced you to want the things you want, to do the work you did, to move through the rooms you moved through. The growth was something you reached for, and the departure inside the growth, that was the price inside the choosing. You just didn't see the price clearly until you were already gone. You still go back. That matters to say. The table is still there. The people are still people you love, in the way you love places that used to fit you perfectly. And sometimes, in the right moment, it still does. Sometimes the frequency lines up and the ease comes back, and you remember that the history is real and the love is real, and none of what shifted erases that. But sometimes you sit there and you feel the size of what's changed, and you don't say it out loud, because what is there to say? That you're different now? They can see it. That you're going somewhere? They've already filed that away. So you nod, you smile because the moment calls for it, and you wonder if the new rooms will ever feel as much like home as that table once did. And you already know the answer somewhere. You just haven't made peace with it yet.